Currency and money. Here's something that sounds unsettling but becomes fascinating once you sit with it. Money isn't real. Not in any physical sense that matters. A $100 bill is a piece of printed paper. Its value doesn't come from the paper. It doesn't come from gold sitting in a vault somewhere. It comes from the fact that millions of people have collectively agreed to treat it as valuable. That shared belief is the entire foundation. This isn't unique to cash. It applies to every currency in every country. The difference between a dollar and a random piece of paper isn't material, it's agreement. Society decided one holds value and the other doesn't. The moment enough people stop believing in a currency, it collapses. History has examples. So how does the system stay stable? Governments issue currency. Central banks regulate how much of it circulates. Too much money printed too quickly, and inflation degrades its value. Everyone's purchasing power drops. Too little money in circulation, and economic activity freezes. People can't afford to operate. The management of money supply is a constant calibration. Push too far in either direction, and the system breaks down. Understanding this, that money is fundamentally a social agreement, changes how you think about wealth, value, and why certain things cost what they do. Value. Pick up any ordinary rock from the ground, worth essentially nothing. Now hand someone a diamond. Same category of rock, but the response is completely different. The difference isn't in the chemistry, it's in the perception. That gap between what something costs to produce and what people believe it's worth, that's value. And understanding it is one of the most practically useful things you can learn. People pay for things proportional to how much they believe those things improve their lives. A surgeon commands a high income because the value they provide saving lives is enormous, and their skills are rare. A great software developer earns significantly more than the hours of their work would suggest, because the product of that work can be distributed to millions of people simultaneously. This same logic explains luxury goods. A designer handbag and a generic one may carry the same items equally well, but one is priced 10 times higher because people have been convinced and have genuinely accepted that it carries a different status. The belief in value creates the value. The practical takeaway: if you want to earn more, deliver more value, develop skills that are difficult to acquire and high in demand. Build things that solve problems other people can't easily solve themselves. The market is, at its core, a mechanism for rewarding perceived value. Taxes. Picture this. You just wrapped up a brutal week delivering packages in the rain, every house seeming further than the last. Your phone buzzes. Direct deposit landed $2,200. You open your bank app, $1,589. You do the math twice because you refuse to believe it the first time. Then you check the breakdown: federal income tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare. Welcome to adulthood, where your paycheck arrives pre-sliced. Here's the thing though. Taxes aren't some random punishment. They're the membership fee for living in a functioning society. Roads, hospitals, fire departments, public schools, none of that runs on good vibes. Your tax dollars keep the lights on. Sometimes, literally. Now, there are different flavors of taxation. Income tax is what gets pulled from your earnings before you ever touch them. Sales tax hits you at the register when you're buying things. Capital gains tax comes for you when your investments do well while you were busy doing nothing. And then there's Social Security tax and Medicare tax, which show up on every single paycheck. Social Security is essentially the government forcing you into a retirement savings plan. You contribute now, and when you're old enough to deserve it, you get paid back over time. Medicare funds healthcare for elderly and severely ill people. It's a health insurance pool everyone chips into. Then comes tax season. The government already has most of your information, but instead of just sending you a bill, they make you fill out forms to confirm what they already know. If your numbers match theirs, you're fine. If not, things get interesting in the worst possible way. Some people pay taxes quarterly, some pay annually. Some people think ignoring taxes is a strategy. Those people tend to end up with a very different kind of documentary about their lives. Taxes sting. But countries with stronger public funding tend to have better infrastructure, better healthcare, and a better overall quality of life. So maybe the math works out eventually. Banks. You walk into a bank. You hand over your paycheck. The teller smiles, types something, and tells you the money is safe and sound in your account. You leave feeling responsible. Meanwhile, your money has already left the building. Most people imagine banks as high-security vaults where their money sits untouched, waiting patiently like a loyal pet. That's not what's happening. Banks are financial middlemen. The moment you deposited your money, they took a large portion of it, let's say 90%, and lent it out to someone buying a car, a house, or a particularly expensive vacation. This is called fractional reserve banking. The logic is that not everyone will demand all their money back at the exact same moment. Banks only need to keep a fraction on hand to cover typical daily withdrawals. It works beautifully until it doesn't. 2008 was the reminder that when people panic and everyone rushes to pull out at once, the whole system wobbles. So why do banks want your money? Simple. They lend it at a higher interest rate than they pay you. You're the supplier. Borrowers are the demand. The bank is just charging a toll to stand in the middle. And why do you keep your money there? Convenience, safety, and because most banks in the U.S. are federally insured up to $250,000 per person, meaning even if the bank collapses, the government has your back up to that limit. Not bad for something you set up in 20 minutes. Interest. You borrow $1,000. A year later, you owe $1,200. No one robbed you. That extra $200 is interest, the price of using money that isn't yours. There are two versions of this story. Simple interest is the tame one. You borrow a set amount, you pay a fixed fee on top. Clean, predictable, boring in the best way. Compound interest is the one that changes lives in both directions. It means interest earns interest. The growth stacks on itself every cycle. Miss a few credit card payments, and suddenly that modest balance has quietly doubled on you. But run it in the other direction. Invest money at a reasonable return and leave it alone, and it grows exponentially. $100 becomes $200, then $400. Then before you realize it, you're looking at a number that doesn't feel real. The gap between people who understand compound interest and people who don't shows up decades later in retirement accounts and credit card balances. The rule is straightforward. If you're paying interest, eliminate it as aggressively as possible. If you're earning interest, protect it, add to it, and let time do the heavy lifting. Interest is either draining you quietly or building for you quietly. The direction it flows is largely your call. Credit scores. Somewhere, a number between 300 and 850 is quietly making decisions about your life. Whether you get that apartment, what interest rate you pay on a car loan, whether a lender trusts you enough to offer you a mortgage, that number is your credit score. It has nothing to do with how much money you have. It's entirely about how reliably you've handled borrowed money in the past. Lenders need to answer one question before giving you anything. Will this person actually pay me back? Your credit score is the answer. Below 580 and you're considered a high-risk borrower, expect rejections or punishing interest rates. Above 750 and lenders treat you like a responsible adult, which unlocks better terms on nearly everything. The score is calculated across several factors. Payment history is the biggest pay on time, consistently, and this works in your favor. Credit utilization measures how much of your available credit you're actually using. Lower is better. Credit age rewards you for having long-standing accounts. Credit mix considers whether you have different types of credit cards, loans, installment plans, and new credit inquiries note how many times you've recently applied for new accounts. One thing that surprises people, you can be completely debt-free and still have a poor credit score. If you've never used credit, there's no history for lenders to evaluate. The system rewards people who borrow and repay responsibly, not people who avoid debt entirely. The game has rules. Learn them, work within them, and the score becomes a tool rather than an obstacle.
Inflation.
You remember that coffee you used to get for $3? It's $5.50 now. Same cup, same cafe, same barista who still doesn't smile. But the price has crept up year after year, and at some point, you stop noticing. That's inflation. The slow, quiet erosion of what your money can actually buy. Your salary might say the same number, but if prices keep climbing, that number buys less every year. Your dollar is still a dollar. It just isn't what it used to be. What causes it? A few things. When too much money chases too few goods, sellers raise prices because they can. When supply chains break down and production gets more expensive, businesses pass the cost on to you. And sometimes pure expectation drives it. If people believe prices are about to rise, they buy early, which drives prices up faster. It becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. A modest amount of inflation, around 2% annually, is actually healthy. Economies need movement. But when it spikes, savings shrink in real value. wages lag behind, and everyday purchases become a quiet source of stress. The main weapon against runaway inflation is interest rates. When central banks raise rates, borrowing becomes more expensive. People spend less. Demand cools. Prices stabilize. It's a blunt instrument, but it works. The downside is that higher interest rates also slow down growth, which is why it's a balancing act, not a magic fix. Investing. You now know what inflation does. It silently reduces what your money is worth over time. Leaving cash sitting in a low-interest account isn't saving, it's a slow loss. Investing is how you push back. Investing means putting your money into something that has the potential to grow faster than inflation eats it. It's not gambling, and it's not reserved for people who already have a lot of money. It's a long-term strategy that anyone with patience and consistency can use. The main categories. Stocks are partial ownership in a company. If the company grows, your share grows with it. Bonds are essentially loans you give to a government or corporation. They pay you back with interest over a fixed period. Funds are collections of stocks and bonds bundled together, which spreads your risk across many investments rather than concentrating it in one. Real estate is property that generates value either through appreciation over time or by generating rental income. The biggest myth about investing is that it requires either genius or luck. It requires neither. What it requires is starting early, diversifying so one bad investment doesn't wipe you out, and leaving it alone long enough for compound growth to do its job. Markets go down. That's part of the process. The real risk isn't volatility. It's staying out of the market entirely, while inflation quietly reduces what you have. Recessions. A recession is officially defined as 2 consecutive quarters, 6 months of economic contraction. In plain terms, it means things are shrinking. Jobs, growth, spending, confidence, all of it pulling back at once. 1 quarter. Everything looks fine. Companies are hiring. People are spending. The news is manageable. Then the signals start. Layoffs tick up. Stock markets slide. Businesses cut budgets. Consumers stop buying anything beyond the basics. In a recession, the domino effect is the real danger. One company freezes hiring. Their suppliers lose orders. Those suppliers lay off workers. Those workers stop eating out, stop shopping, stop spending. Local businesses feel it. More layoffs. The cycle continues until something breaks it. What starts a recession? High interest rates, making credit too expensive to use. A global shock war, a pandemic, a supply chain disaster, or simply the natural rhythm of economic cycles. Expansion always peaks at some point, and a correction follows. Governments typically respond by cutting interest rates to make borrowing cheaper, releasing stimulus funds to inject money into the economy, or both. It takes time. Recessions end. They always have, but they leave marks. People who lived through them spend differently afterward. Businesses operate leaner. The scars inform behavior for years. Time. Every asset has limits. Money can be lost and recovered. Knowledge can be built. Skills can be developed. But time is the one thing no one gets more of, regardless of what they earn or how smart they work. Most people spend their early working years in a direct trade. Their time for a paycheck. 1 hour worked, 1 hour paid. It's functional, but it has a ceiling. There are only so many hours you can sell. The people who build serious wealth eventually shift from selling time to deploying capital money, skills, or systems that generate returns without requiring them to be present for every dollar earned. That transition is what separates modest earning from genuine wealth building. But nowhere does time have more power than in long-term investing. 2 people invest the same amount per month. One starts at 22, the other starts at 35. By retirement, the one who started earlier has nearly twice the balance despite potentially contributing fewer total years. The compounding returns stack longer. That's not theory, that's math. Small amounts invested early consistently, without panic selling, routinely produce outcomes that feel impossible until you see the numbers. The most valuable financial move available to anyone who still has decades ahead of them isn't finding the best stock or the hottest opportunity. It's simply starting. Because the one thing that cannot be recovered, replaced, or bought is time.